And we're live. Welcome back, everybody, to the PEO Speedwagon. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. We have a very special episode here with the guest, Pete Hinojosa. Pete, thank you so much for jumping in here and joining us on Season 3, Episode 2, and joined always with Ryan Shapiro as well. And so, Pete, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Good to be here. Thanks, Ryan and Rick. The two R's. I love it.
That's right.
Yeah.
We try to make it tricky on a Monday morning here. That's right.
The names get exchanged quite a bit. I get called Ryan. I don't know if he's ever been called Rick yet, but I get called Ryan a lot. That's so.
Yeah. Ricky's the one I'm striving for. So that'll be the day.
We'll get that to stick. Well, Pete, again, thank you so much for being here. Now, for those tuning in, Pete is the president over at Quest Leadership Dynamics, but also with a pretty extensive background in the PEO space and industry. And so really saw a great opportunity here to sit down and talk to you, not only about your experience working in the PEO space, but also working with and doing leadership development for PEOs and various companies. And I think that all kind of falls in line with what we're trying to do for our clients with PEOMG. And the purpose of this podcast is just to, grow in knowledge of the space, and also for me to grow in a bit of leadership development in the industry as well too. And so really excited to pick your brain today kind of on maybe trends you're seeing in the industry and just kind of your background and general approach to doing that type of training. And so
Sure.
Maybe tell folks a little bit about yourself and your company and a little bit of your background as well.
Sure. Always appreciate the opportunity to share. So the funny part about my background is I'm actually a trained teacher. So both my degrees are in science. Started back pretty good while ago, back in the 1990s, teaching high school. And I taught high school for 20 years. And the quick story is that my first year of teaching, everybody in my family is a teacher. So my mom, my dad, my sisters, everybody, my grandmother, great-grandmother. So 100 years of teaching in the state of Texas. And I'm teaching physics that first year, physics and chemistry. And a young lady comes up to me and basically says, "Can I talk to you after class?" And I end up, talking to her right after class. And she says, "Listen, it's kind of personal. Can I come after school?" And I'm like, "Sure. Yeah, come after school." But when you're 23, you have no idea what personal means, and you have no idea why they're coming after school. And so she does, and she sits down, and takes her a second to get up the courage. And then she basically, it's a hard way to start a talk, by the way. So, but just hang in there, audience. But she looks at me and she finally says, "I hate this school. I hate Kingwood. I hate my parents. I hate these teachers." And I mean, she had a slew of relationship things, but the one that hurt me the most was she said, "I hate myself. I want to commit suicide." And I'm 23 years old, sitting in a science class thinking my whole goal is to teach, science. Hold on. Yeah. And instead, I spend the next 20 years trying to figure out a way to help kids. And so about 5 years after that, my wife and I created a camp for kids. And that's really where my original company was called Omega Quest. And it means a purposeful journey. And when I started doing leadership development, I was moving more into the professional side. We called it Quest Leadership Dynamics because no one would understand what Omega Quest meant. So at least I had something in there that said that, I did something with leadership development. So when we created that camp, the whole emphasis was, what could I do to help students understand that they had worth? And that can be a whole slew of things, but the reality is that it never really changed. And when I challenge business owners to look at the relationship side of their company, if you think about, I always use this as an example, but I always ask the audience when I share that story, anybody want to take a guess what she was making in my classroom? Now, this is a physics class in high school. And then they'll guess all kinds of things. And eventually I'll tell them she was making a 93. And the point being, when I share that information is that she had the competency, but if we're not careful, if someone doesn't have the heart part, the commitment part, even more importantly, if she didn't see herself right as part of that company, as part of, in this case, a high school, she could be surrounded by, and she was, 4,000 other students and feel completely alone. And the reality is she had the competency. She could have put that competency into her life, but for some reason, she was struggling with trying to put the heart part with the head. And I try to challenge business owners to think that way, is that you've got people sitting in an office, and if it could be 10 people and they don't feel a part of it, it could be 100 people, it could be 1,000, it could be 4,000. They don't feel recognized, and their strengths aren't being utilized, or in some form or fashion, the relationship piece, the connection piece to the culture and the competency goes out the window. That's typically what I share with the three C's. Company has a culture, they have competencies, and they typically want to start with competency. They'll say, we need to get this competency within this job. We need these job descriptions. We need to hire this type of person. And then from there, they think about the culture piece, which is always good. Now, how's that person going to fit within this culture that we set up? But the piece we often miss is the part that connects both of them. So it's the relationship piece that connects the culture to the competency, because you can have all the competencies in the world in a human being. And you've heard the statement before, but someone will say, we don't typically leave companies, but we will leave leaders. You've heard that before, those type of statements. And it's the connection piece. It's the things that happen when people don't feel a part of something. And it's typically connected to the culture. So anyway, that's the basic story. Is we created a camp for kids in 1997. I ran it for 20 years, part-time as I was teaching still for those first 20. And in between there, wrote some books and developed a leadership curriculum for the state of Texas. It was a 36-week course. Matter of fact, I was just looking yesterday, and one of the teachers at the high school that I originally taught at, he's still teaching that curriculum. So that course has been going since 2000. So over 24 years, somebody's been teaching a course that I put my heart and soul into. So I hope the kids are still enjoying it. They don't even know I wrote it anymore, but it's always glad to know that you have some type of legacy somewhere, that, what you love is still being put together. So that's where it all started. And Quest Leadership Dynamics, I call it, we do TLC. So, and then of course we give TLC, which is, tender loving care to our customers. But what it really stands for is team leadership and culture development. So
that's great. Well, you had mentioned that you set out to find a way to instill worth into these kids. And so I guess my question is, after doing it for that long, what's your answer to that question? How do you instill that in people and in kids?
We got another hour to go, but the reality is that tomorrow I'm going to be speaking to a group of ladies, believe it or not, that have all been part of, it's a nonprofit, and they've been under sex trafficking, all kinds of things. And it's always hard when you go and speak to somebody about the self-worth. You have to be careful that you're not, taking two words and messing them up, because a lot of people will think, well, that's half our problem, is that everybody thinks, they're special. And the reality is that it's not a self-esteem thing. It's not a, too much esteem in yourself. And then that's a false pride, and not enough esteem in yourself. And then you go down a road that the young lady went down, which she has no worth at all. And so I always use a word, it's going to be a funny word, but I tried a million words, but, calibrator, that's not it. Gauge, no, that's not it. But when I would teach high school, I would have to take kids, like I was a coach. And so I would take them on tournaments, and we had a bus. And so, drive around a bus in your 20s, it's not exactly ideal in Houston, Texas, but they have a governor on buses so that you can't go over a certain amount of speed. And that's really probably the best way of looking at self-image or self-worth or self-esteem, however you want to put it, is that it's a governor. And if you can see yourself the right way, if you esteem yourself the right way, that worth is manifested in how you hold yourself, the confidence that you have, your willingness to go for big goals and dreams. And that was one of the things I was trying to do in my classroom, is when someone stops setting big goals, they don't see themselves the right way. So an old quote, little Zig Ziglar quote for everybody out there, in case y'all don't know Zig Ziglar, but the most important image you'll ever hold is the image you hold of yourself. And so that is the starting point of when I start speaking about it. But it's, it's multiple layers of where self-worth comes from. I always love thinking about, there was an original, it's called Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. And what he noticed is that you could change something externally, but if you don't change it internally, it takes a while for the internal to catch up to the external. So he was a plastic surgeon. And as he was doing some plastic surgery, he started to notice that he could show somebody before and after pictures, and they would say, I don't see any difference. And he would look at him again. He goes, no, look, I did a full rhinoplasty, everything. And they said, yeah, I still don't see any different. Then he would show them a picture of them before and after. And then they would say, well, I guess I see the difference. And here's the key. I just don't feel any different. And so he kind of coined that idea that we have this internal thing that has to catch up to the external things that we're hearing. And so that's part of what I try to do pretty consistently is you can't give away, this is another little quote, but you can't give away something you don't got. So if you don't have something good inside of you, you're not probably going to give good stuff away. And it's all the things that we've heard for a long time as we get older, good stuff in, good stuff out. But it's more important than we'll ever imagine that if I don't see myself as having any worth, then what do we do with things we don't think have worth?
I hear you say that, and I think about that for so many leaders who are leading people, that is actually what's going on. Because there's so many times, and I'm sure you, as you have coached leaders on how to lead their team, they can think of very specific scenarios of individuals who have tremendous skill, who have capability, who have the whole package.
Yep.
But they don't get what they want from that individual because that person themselves doesn't see it themselves yet, that there's not that actualization. It's delayed. And for a leader, that's incredibly not only frustrating because you want for that person to see the way you see them, but two, it's a missed opportunity for leadership because you probably at that point feel like that person's skill-wise, even competency around specific things that need to be done in a role is all there, but yet just don't have that last element. And that leader probably feels at a loss, and a good leader at that point probably feels a lot of responsibility.
Yeah. Boy, you hit on a bunch of stuff, but the hard part sometimes is realizing that in leadership, the difference between competency and commitment. And so if you've ever heard of Ken Blanchard, they do an incredible job at the Blanchard Company on looking at, how you lead somebody that is starting a task and moving all the way over to fully being able to do that task. That was one of the things that I really enjoyed teaching, especially during my time at Insperity, is every one of our leaders would go through situational leadership. And the reason you do that is because of statements like Ryan just shared, which is there'll be a moment where you're, and this is going to sound backwards. Okay. So just hang in there for a second, but there'll be a moment where you think it's a competency issue and it's not, it's a heart issue. It's a willingness issue. It's a confidence issue. And so when you build somebody's confidence, then you also start building their competence, because a good term to think about in confidence, or the word confidence, is it's like semper fidelis, always faithful. Confidence, fidelis, is in the middle of confidence as well, but it's having faith that you can do it without help. That's what confidence is. So as someone starts to build their confidence, they believe they can do that task without help. So we often miss an opportunity as leaders to build somebody's confidence, and we'll lose patience pretty quickly, or, man, we hired them for this reason, and why aren't they doing it? Or what's going on here? And you'll realize that that's the first piece of the puzzle, is their heart part adds to their ability to want to do something. And then there's just a flat willingness. I just don't like the culture. There's a mismatch in values. There's all types of things like that. And so that's the first piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. And I imagine that there's an added layer of complexity there, because what I believe to be true, we've spent a lot of time together, and your approach has informed a lot of the things that I've incorporated in my own leadership styles with various teams and over the years. But if an individual is coming into an organization where they are least competent and confident, they have this belief system that I need to go learn like the tactical elements of this role, blocking and tackling. Right. How do I utilize the CRM? How do I, what is a phone script if I'm in a prospecting role, or how do I consult on human capital strategy, whatever that is.
Right.
So I need the X's and O's so I can feel confident.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing you say is it's kind of the reverse. Like, yes, we're going to have to get there. We're going to train you up. We're going to teach you all the right things, or the talk tracks, or the impact statements, or whatever. But at the end of the day, I actually, as a leader, have to work with you on confidence and your heart.
Yeah.
because that's going to unlock your ability to understand that more. And so the leader's objective and the new hire's objective are somewhat diametrically opposed.
Yeah. It's funny. If you look at somebody new that is supposedly bringing in all their competencies, the way we decide that is a job description. So we look at this job description and say, these are all the competencies I'm looking for. And then they're supposed to put them into practice. Okay, there's this little secret, and it's not that big of a switch, but I like to call them, instead of just doing a job description, how does someone become successful in this role? So how do you convert a job description behaviors into success behaviors? And if a company can think that way, and that's one of the things I love to work on with companies, is helping them see that the job description is the starting point of what they think the behaviors they need for an employee. But the reality is, we all know this. There's tribal traditions. There's ways to use CRM better. There's tips and techniques to overcoming objections. There's these things that help somebody be successful in that role. And if you teach just to the job description or wait for somebody to do their job description, you're going to miss, that person is going to feel completely incompetent for the entire time, because they're thinking, I came in with all these skill sets, and the second you say, do it our way, they're not successful. So instead of concentrating on these job descriptions, start thinking about how to create success descriptions, success behaviors. Take every one of your behaviors on a job description and say, how does our company help somebody be successful in that role? And if you can think that way, now training development makes sense. And that's why people ultimately end up hiring, people like myself, is I look for ways to turn competencies into success opportunities. And the only way to do that is to dig into your company and say, this is how we do it. These are the tribal traditions. These are the ways that our top tiers do it, and put those best practices into place in what's called a 90-day success plan. And so that's one of the things I love working on with companies, is helping them create that 90-day success plan.
Well, and as you know, kind of that 90-day success plan, that was part of your influence. I had built at a PEO we were at in Insperity what was called NSP 90X. It was one of the first puns of many.
It was good.
Which was a 90-day prescription of how you were going to approach not only every single day, but also trying to tie those back to specific skills, like success patterns that employees
100%.
would have to have. At the end of 90 days, in theory, I'm very knowledgeable and I know things, but I've more importantly, perhaps all along the way, I was connecting the dots to success, like understanding these things were going to make me successful.
Yeah, think about that. Because you took the time as a leader to sit and lay out a 90-day plan for someone to be successful in your office, you also had the opportunity, instead of sitting in your office, you had something that you could do each week to check, is week one, am I covering the key competencies that they can handle in week one to be set up for success? Then in week two, then in week three, week four, week five. I bet if we went out there and looked at companies and asked what's their 90-day plan to help somebody in any role be successful, well, we do training. So, okay, that's great. I'm glad you do training. And then you'll hear it, what I call the people poster, is then people get back from training and someone will turn around and tell them, yeah, we don't use any of that. Do it like this. And it's the do it like this that matters. If that's what helps somebody be successful, then why are we training people in spending a ton of money on all kinds of infrastructure, and then someone's turning back around that's doing it every day saying, no, the way to be successful in this company is to do it like this. And so sometimes the mismatch when it comes to how we do training and development, it's a simple conversation, but what's more important is that whoever's doing training and development actually finds out what that success plan looks like on the street. And if they can make those two things come together, now training is matching what we all believe to be true that helps somebody be successful. And wow, wouldn't that be great? That'd be money well spent.
Well, it's time well spent, even more importantly, too. And because that time of a new employee, or even someone who's been there who is maybe not performed and is now seeking or revisioning on their training to get to where they originally wanted to go, that time is invaluable. But I mean, I'd be curious your thoughts about that, because what you described and what I've experienced at many places is there's this element of, we have a training program,
Yeah.
whether you're big public traded, small,
Sure.
startup like I've been a part of, what have you, and you invest a lot of money and time into the development of that. But at the same time, whether it's back in your district offices or with your leaders, there is this like division of like, yeah, do all that. That's good. But then do this. And then in that moment, I imagine, you think you're giving somebody a shortcut to success because you're saying but you're also communicating something very confusing, which is ignore the corporate training and just this way. And then that individual at some level's got to go, well, then why do we have this? Like, what are you trying to accomplish over here? And so then they run through that training kind of confused and probably slightly with an element of a stiff arm, like, okay, my top rep back at my office said, have fun, do this, enjoy the training, go down to corporate. But really, it's this. This is what's important over here. So, like, why do companies do that? Is it just a check the box type thing to have training?
I think every company starts with the idea, and I'm going to give credit where credit's due, is that to create even a day's worth of training, the amount of effort it takes to generate, 8 hours worth of information to put in front of someone is a feat in itself. The instructional design work, looking at what a successful program looks like from start to finish, all those things, it's a lot of effort. And I think what happens slowly is, at first, you are training to those things that help someone be successful, because there's nothing, that's what we're all trying to do. It's like, okay, oh, did you hear that? That's really good. Let's train to it. All right. So everybody stop for a second. Let's train to it. Then when you start creating a department, if you don't have communication between the corporate and as it grows out, then what slowly ends up happening is corporate hears from a select group of people, or the trainers hear from a select group of people, and it might be that those select group of people that are talking to them are saying, yeah, that's good, or we need that. And what they're really saying is, foundationally, everything that you're talking about is pretty good. But execution-wise, if we really had a better question, like a better conversation, we would say now the things that are happening today aren't the same as when we wrote it, a year ago. And so maybe part of what we all have to do in training development is keep up with whatever the trends are. Having our pulse on what's happening on the street that helps somebody be successful today is not the same as when somebody says, you'll have a leader or manager. It's like they're still pulling up a story they, told 10 years ago, and they're like, this is how we do it. And everybody in the office is like, no, it's not. That's not even close to how we do it. Please stop using that story. But
yeah, you're now speaking for Rick in basically every conversation with me. He's like, hey, it's not 1990 anymore. Just FYI. No, and how often should leadership training departments be looking at their content? Because we know the world is growing, and information and trends and AI and everything else, like, it's growing. I mean, it's going to grow faster over the next 10 minutes than it has in the previous 100 years.
No kidding.
So is there a way to think about how often should we be reevaluating? Because you just described, it's an enormous lift to build that content. It's 100%. An enormous lift. But at the same time, the thoughtfulness of leaders and trainers is not to just, say these old, anecdotes all the time. They'd like new, fresh content, and they'd like it to match what's going on.
I think good companies, what they do is, the bigger they get, the more, I know it's going to sound so simplistic, but the bigger they get, the more they communicate. They need to communicate. When the smaller you are, the more you're communicating. You can't help but be talking to the person that's, when you're a group of 5 to 10, you're solving problems in real time with one another. Oh, that person just called. We need to solve that. Okay, that major client is asking for this. We need to make sure we train in that. We have certain regulations or certifications or quality management standards that we have to have. You don't just skip on those. You do those in real time, or you lose clients. So there's things that you train in real time all the time. And what ends up happening, I think, is that foundationally, again, I hate saying words twice, but foundationally, when a company tries to do this at a scale level, is they've created some type of system that says, here's where we start and here's where we're trying to get to in your role. And then slowly what happens is, as the role starts to change, then if we're not communicating more often with the street, then what ends up happening after a year is that foundation is still right, but the details to being successful are slowly a little bit off. And so in real time, we fix those things, like in a small group. But in a bigger corporation that's moving and scaling, you might miss opportunities because you're not communicating more often with the people that are doing it on a daily basis. From the day before COVID started to the next day, everybody got retrained. And so we're all sitting there learning how to do virtual. If we're not thinking about that and getting ahead of the curve, like right now, how do you utilize AI? How do you utilize, different tools? If you're not ahead of the curve right now and helping your whichever employees you have, whatever roles you have, you're already behind the curve there. So what are we communicating immediately to the shifts and changes? One last thing. And if you have changes that you're trying to implement, new processes, procedures, new CRM systems, new ERPs, I don't care, whatever it is that you're putting into your company, man, those are immediate. That's immediate training. And most companies get that. They're not trying to wait for 10 years to do that. They just implemented a, $2 million spend on some type of system and they want to get trained in it. The problem is that I think we undertrain when it comes to big systems like that. And so that's another conversation for itself, when we undertrain instead of, we spend all this money and we think everybody should get it in a week. Hey, we did a training on it in an hour. What have you tried implementing it and you just using it on a daily basis? That's a test that goes across a year, getting feedback from your force, whatever it is, Salesforce, your employees, on how they utilize that service so that we get best practices again. And I think sometimes we're like, well, the company told us to train it like this and now we're done. That's almost the opposite problem. So
yeah, I think something I noticed too with like tech being brought into organizations too is that they want to sell its simplicity and ease of use as well, which then kind of goes counterintuitive to the number of hours of training that they're hoping that you'll do to then learn how to use it. And so they try to make these user faces extremely familiar based on like what other things you're probably already using. And I think it makes the learning process like just a little shallow because they get in just enough where they're like, oh, this is a little easy to use. And then they don't unlock a lot of the other tools that are in there because that would require additional hours of training and to go deeper. They'd rather just say, oh, I know how to, create a contact card or something.
Yeah, it's always, it's this constant give and take. But the question that I always like to ask myself back to, when you look at a Blanchard model of situational leadership is in D1 and D2, which is developmental level 1, developmental level 2, they're still learning. And so they need a lot of directing and coaching in the learning side of things. And in D1, they're enthusiastic. By the time they hit D2, they're completely frustrated and they're overwhelmed and they're mad and you didn't give them the right information. And that's where they're going to quit or create sabotage, or that's where momentum is lost. And if you don't get them out of that phase where they're overwhelmed or frustrated, or they only know how to use that tool and now they have to use other parts of the system, and they're like, I don't get it, and we're not getting trained in this, the more frustration you build, the harder the culture becomes in that moment to accepting the next thing that we start to change. But what you want to do is get them over to what we call D3 and D4, which is the doing side of things. And Blanchard uses an interesting term, but they look at when someone just needs support or you can delegate to them, you get 3 times or 10 times the ROI on that skill or task. And so if you can get somebody over to full competency and full commitment, 10 times the ROI on the task, I'm in. I want somebody feeling confident, feeling competent that they can do that without my help. And then you got a whole nother issue where managers like to step in right before they get their competency and commitment in full. And then they step in and want to solve all their problems for them. And then we create a whole nother issue. We create a real pipeline of, not a pipeline, a clog in the pipe, a pinch in the pipe, right where the leader doesn't want to turn over their expertise, their knowledge. I see a lot of that when it comes to businesses that are, say, 10 to 50, 50 to 75, 75 to 100. Each time they grow, the leadership has to step away and become more of the visionary, the strategic operations of a company. And instead, they're the experts in everything. So guess where everybody comes for best practices? They'll come to those first 4 or 5 that created the business. And so as you try to scale, you have to be able to duplicate your knowledge. And that's why succession plans and all that stuff starts to pop in when it comes to talent development. But that's another little chink in people's armor is if you create 4 or 5 people that know everything, get ready for those 4 or 5 people to do everything. So
that's really, and that's another one of those paradoxes, because I imagine there are some leaders who go like, if I know everything, I want to be hand in the dirt leader. I want to support you. I want to guide you. But in a lot of ways, you're actually limiting those individuals because you're not allowing them to flip over from that D2 state to D3 through that delegation and belief. And when you believe in somebody, that's how you elevate their confidence, right? So you're back to being that governor on that true accelerator of their growth and success, which is the belief in themselves.
Yeah, you just take that governor off and let them run. And so the the task at hand when you and I were at Insperity was we had 40 offices and we wanted to grow to 100. And we were seeing a speed of execution of about 18 to 24 months to get up an office. Well, 18 to 24 months and then no real money being made is a $2 million to $4 million spend, $1 million just on the building, another $1 million just on the crew. And one of the things we learned there is that if we turned over a manager of a sales team, we would turn over the team 1.5 times. Now that's scary because that means that if we hire 8 and now we lose a manager in those first 18 to 24 months, we then turn over another 8 salespeople, and then another 4. And so we're not making money and we're turning over people. And so if you think about that idea, how do you go from 40 to 100? Well, you have to scale it through a system. And so that's really where training development can come in at the highest level, because if you can create a system to get people up to speed and do it more quickly, now you have people sitting in the seat that are credible and confident, credible, competent, confident, and can do their job. Because that's also a big thing as companies get bigger, is if you stick somebody, even if they have managerial skills, but they don't have the competency skills, the credibility skills that you need to sit in a seat, then the tenured people will just beat that person up. They'll beat that manager up like crazy. And so how do you get somebody credible enough to sit in those seats? If you'll ask me the question, because I'm leading you to do it, well, what are the 4 things that you'll need to create a program like that?
We'll just cut and edit it. No, I'm just kidding. So, Pete, what are the 4 questions
So
that you need to ask?
And this is crucial because think about that. If you can get a training program down or a system down from 18 to 24 months down to 3 to 6 months, and then now they're already credible in their seat when they hit their seat, now you have an opportunity to make money your first year instead of your third year, or even your, starting your second year. So here are the 4 things. So every company should look at these 4 areas. 1, take your job descriptions and turn them into success descriptions. So how do you take the behaviors of a human being and then help them be successful? So that's the first thing. So you look at every role that you have in your company. It's going to take a little bit of effort, but that's why you have good people like me and good, people that do consulting in this area, is that we can show you how to take your job descriptions and turn them into success descriptions. The second piece of the puzzle is for every successful job, there's internal relationships that interact with that job. And you're not going to be successful if you create silos within a company. And so that job impacts or is impacted by other internal departments. So at Insperity, we had almost 31 different internal relationships that a manager might need to know. Well, think about that. If you don't know, pricing review, if you don't know workers' comp, if you don't know, renewals, there's so many different departments, benefits team. There was 31 different areas that a potential manager would need to know. They sit in a seat the first day. Someone says, well, I'm looking at this deck page. And the guy's like, well, I don't know even to talk to or whatever. And so immediately the person's like, well, you're useless. The ability to know the internal relationships and then share best practices on how that internal relationship works with that role immediately allows that person to gain their credibility. But even as I work in other businesses, same principle. You might have one part of a distribution process that interacts with procurement, and then over on this other side, that impacts how quickly or slowly they get the product. And then in turn, you can sit there and promise all day long on sales, but if you don't understand procurement and distribution, you're in trouble on that side. So knowing the internal relationships is second. So first, job description is success description, internal relationships, number 2. Number 3 is the stuff that, of course, I love to do, which is your professional and personal development. So I typically concentrate on 3 areas: situational leadership, the DISC information, because that's my expertise and my love, and EQ. So if I can stay there within your culture and teach those 3 things, one helps you connect and use strengths of their natural style. One helps you do your competencies, situational leadership, and the EQ makes sure you don't repel every human being that you interact with, right? So instead of being fear and anger all the time, you actually think about how to influence people possibly. And so you've got success description, you got internal relationships, you've got your personal development, and the personal development is how you connect with people internally and do your job well, because you can have all the competencies in the world, but when you repel human beings because of your natural inclination to want done every way, only your way, we need to work on that as culture. And then the last piece is, when we put all that together, you create a 90-day plan that incorporates those first 3. So how do you get someone up to speed successfully? How do you introduce them to the internal relationships? What training or development they need to do personally? Professionally might be like, they need to use this CRM, or they need to use this, they need to get this certification to utilize our system. Or we only use this in this company, and so you need to utilize that. And then finally, that 90-day plan wraps it all together so that in that first 90 days, you're getting someone up to speed and off to a great start. So those are 4 things.
That's incredible. Yeah. And I know we're in a 3-person chat here, but I felt like when you're saying that, annoying people and driving people away just because I feel like you were staring right at me when you were saying that. But no, I mean, that's why it was so influential. I think you came in with an awareness and a thoughtfulness around how to do exactly what you described, and you saw, and your first week on the job, you had the unpleasant opportunity to basically sit with me all week as we were at one of those trainings that I was the guest speaker for all 5 days.
Yeah.
And we talked a lot about this, and I, as we were growing from 40 to 100, I opened about 9 offices out on the West Coast. And so this is really timely for me to be thinking about, and how do we do that and do that well, and start with that leader and start with that culture and those success, competent in transition to competencies, was truly instrumental. And because in the world of PEO, and Rick is learning this, and you've seen it, there is a big build to making this work. If you are a new sales rep at a PEO, across any PEO on the country, you come in with that D1, like just tons of excitement, tons of belief. You're drinking the Kool-Aid in gallons. And then you find out, not only one, is it incredibly hard, but 2, some PEOs don't have tremendous support systems, either through their leaders or just through the organizational structure altogether. Yeah. And so that compounding on top of now you're starting to lose your confidence. You're losing that exuberance that you described. And then people are out. And then just that financial model you're describing around what training can impact starts to come to fruition in a negative fashion. So it's a lot of things at once. And then you can't even, we haven't touched on the fact that PEO is growing so quickly that you've got layers and layers of leaders who have really spent no time understanding the dynamics of a PEO relationship as it relates to a small business. And that's what you're trying to get to. Is I want to be a high-powered consultant. That's what everybody says at the beginning of PEO relationship or employment. And it's so challenging to get there. So
the one of my favorite parts at the kind of before I transitioned and started running my company again full time was talking about all these critical aspects of how a PEO can ultimately impact your business. And so you can look at several of them. One is culture, because as you look at your culture, And you can say this for any company, but these are critical things that every company needs to think about, and where a PEO can come in and stand shoulder to shoulder with you. They'll either find resources for you, or the PEO is built in such a way that they offer these type of resources through employees or whatever it might be. And the first one is the impact on culture. And that has to do with your mission, your vision, your values, all those key things that someone that's a performance specialist or someone like me that comes in and you hire them on the outside and they come in and they work on, are your values being translated into the everyday climate of a company? Because the mismatch between what the leader says compared to what the employee experiences creates that gap of mistrust, and that gap of mistrust shows up as lack of engagement. And what you're looking for is discretionary effort. You're looking for your maximization of people. And so culture is always important. Next is hiring, recruiting, and retention. And they'll team up with all types of ways to help you with hiring, recruiting, and retention, not to mention your job descriptions, your handbook, and all those type of things. So you got culture, hiring, recruiting, retention, rewards, recognition, and compensation. How are you going to set up a reward? How are you going to set up recognizing your people? Are you going to use a 401k? Are you going to do a match? Are you going to do an AIP? Are you going to do some type of benefit process? Benefit package? There's all kind of ways to not only reward and recognize people, but also compensate them so that you get a talent, even if you only have 5 to 10 people, by utilizing a PEO. So culture, hiring, recruiting, rewards, recognition, compensation, liability and compliance. That's where PEOs shine. So what kind of liability and compliance issues are you dealing with in your industry? And how can someone make sure they're helping you that? You've got your HR compliance, you got your safety compliance, you've got your performance management types of compliance. And so those type of people that can help you on that side with those critical issues are all part of what a PEO does. Administrative and technology. So what type of platform are you using right now? And can a PEO step in and use their platform to supplement an HRIS system, any kind of payroll system that you don't have, but now you do? Your insurance is all in one spot. And so there's all kinds of things that a PEO does to supplement a small business that allows them to have an infrastructure that they could never afford if they had to do it themselves, including learning management systems that can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now you can dump all this training and development I'm talking about onto an LMS that's offered by a PEO. Then you start moving into mergers and acquisitions. So mergers and acquisitions are all the opportunities that somebody has when they put this infrastructure in right. You now have a company that can multiply their multiple. They instead of just getting a little bit for their company, they've set up their company thinking about, here's my three little catchphrases, but they've maximized their people, they've streamlined their processes, they've minimized their risk. And by doing that, they have one area that they can pull all their data from in this great site. All the information's there. So when a company goes to offer to buy their company or acquire their company, they now get a completely different multiple than before, because the way they're set up, they can see that they have all of their stuff put together in one spot. And then the final two are leadership and communication. But in doing leadership and communication, it pulls all this together and makes a tight bow for how a PEO comes in and starts looking at your company and putting all these different aspects together. So, and I didn't learn that on my own. I learned that because the CEO and the original founder, one of the original founders, Paul Sarvari, first talked about it in his book called Take Care of Your People. So make sure, if you haven't read that book, that's I highly recommend it. So,
yeah. And I think, and that's so well said. And, I think about so many of those elements of what a business owner, business leader is trying to navigate to through a PEO decision with whomever they're talking to.
Yeah.
But like a theme here, I think of our whole conversation are like competing concepts. Like leadership is always this friction point of trying, we talked about with, success versus competency, and then what an employee wants and what a leader wants at the beginning of a relationship. Yeah. And I think that even the first thing you touched on in those series of scenarios is culture, because a lot of business owners, that's their chief concern with a PEO. You talk about it as it's an agent of making the biggest impact on your culture that you want and helping you get your house in order. And a lot of business owners sit there going like, I just don't know, like culturally, if this is a good thing. And right there, that's conflict.
Yeah,
Because
that's interesting.
yeah, and so thematically of our whole conversation, it kind of seems like this is the thing, is that what sometimes you need and what somebody else is trying to give you aren't always lining up, but it doesn't. It's that positive friction,
Yeah.
right? Because once someone breaks through, someone goes, okay, now I can see how your particular brand of PEO, whatever it is, you've got in your bag there,
Mhm.
it can have a positive impact on my culture. And if there's one thing, not benefit costs, not
Yeah. Yeah.
integrated expense management solutions or whatever, like little things you
Right.
thought you wanted at the beginning of the process.
A really solid
it,
time
it,
and attendance process.
right, exactly. All important things,
Yeah.
but pale in comparison to having this big impact on my culture and through that on my people and maximizing my people.
Um, what's interesting is that if you look at the philosophy, the culture is impacting all the others, all the other pieces. For example, when I just shared at the beginning, if you say training development is important, but don't want to give anybody any time to do it, there's a mismatch between that, and the culture will live that out. And that's why I was saying a second ago is that you can have all these organizational things that you believe to be true. So, and I call them like your organizational poster. It's like, here's all the organizational things that we say, we want to do this and we want to do that. We believe in this and we believe in integrity and respect. And, we believe in making sure that, we are customer, driven. And I mean, you can just go down the list, whatever people create as values. Then the leader has to then implement what the organization says is critical. The people live within that experience. The employees live within that experience. And the gap between what the organizational says here and the leaders, implements to what they experience creates mistrust. So I always try to use that as an example, is that if you think hiring recruiting is important and you have a slow way you do hiring recruiting, or it's really cumbersome, or when you hire someone immediately, nothing matches what you said in your hiring to what they're actually experiencing on the job, every one of these becomes a culture problem, because now the person's looking at your company saying, well, man, it sounded good when I was going through your hiring and recruiting, but now that I'm here, there's none of the stuff that you promised. And then I always say this, the first person they talk to at the job, they better really love your company, because they're about to download the entire culture to that person within their first sitting at lunch. And if they don't believe in your company, you don't want them taking them out for that first week, because now you've created that D2 version, frustration, all of those things. So the key is culture in hiring, culture in recruiting. How are we recruiting people? What are we doing? How are we retaining people? Okay. Why is liability and compliance a culture issue? Because do you remember this movie? Let's see if I can think of it. The Firm with Tom Cruise,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In the movie The Firm, he's sitting with Gene Hackman and he's saying, well, how far do you want me to push it? He goes, I don't care how far we push it. I just don't want to lose. Like, oh, you mean you care if we get an audit? I don't care if we get an audit. I just don't want to lose the audit. And then ultimately that's the downfall of the whole company, which is their culture was based on, illegal operations. And so the culture accepted it. The people had to accept it, but that's actually the downfall, which is, if you go back, the culture allowing that type of interaction was the ultimate problem with the company itself. So every area in a company has culture as this thread that runs through it, and it creates the final, what we would call the tapestry. So you can just look at it over and over and over again.
Yeah. And it makes me think about, there's so many conversations you have with business owners, in particularly taken away from PEO, like why HR is so important at a small business level. I think there's a lot of conversations that PEO sales reps and leaders have, and it's like, hey, I'm 15 employees, I'm 25 employees. Like, HR is not a big thing for us. Yeah. But that is, if you look at it through the lens of, like, again, blocking, tackling, payroll services, benefits, everything else. The reality is a business is a collection of people. And therefore, especially at the small business level, right? I mean, you get bigger, you have different elements, you have systems, processes, other factors that take you a little further away from just people being the business. But at a small size, people is the business. And when somebody comes in, that is the first thing that has to be addressed. Like human resources is the most important thing because it's designed to support that person and to help them ingrain and in that culture and understand what's going on in this business and feel supported. Because I've always felt that the onboarding process of a new employee is the beginning of that employee's attrition. It's not the actual acceleration of their growth. It's the point where they're at most risk because if the culture isn't sound, if the support model isn't built, that employee is more likely to leave that organization well before they were scheduled to. And that's why HR, not PEO, but just HR as a concept is so critical.
Yeah. And the hard part sometimes is distinguishing between HR, the group that is there to make sure liability and compliance and all that stuff is done, and ultimately the people you go to when you're in trouble. And the difference when you do it right is that you're not doing anything wrong. I don't want to say it that way. But when HR is used not just to make sure you're in, rules, regulations, compliance, liability, when it's also used for talent development, putting the right pieces in, because every company I've ever worked for, the bigger you get, the more compliance issues you have to follow. And the more compliance issues you have to follow, you have to have somebody that's tracking all that stuff. And so that's where HR can really shine. When you have the right HR department, they're tracking all the individual information that an employee has from the time they start all the way till they get their first promotion, their AIP, everything. And so they're tracking all that stuff all year long. It's an incredibly valuable service. And to have people that are knowledgeable from a potential PEO support you and with their infrastructure, instead of you having to create all that yourself, geez, it's a lot. It's a lot of effort to do that. So
yeah, it is. And it allows a business to focus its intentions on what's important.
100%.
There are things you described. There's stuff you got to get done. Like the employee definitely wants to get paid. So in the first day, they set up their payroll and they enroll their benefits and they do their I-9 because there's a tight window of 72 hours on that thing. And all that stuff is a distraction away from really what's important. So theoretically, if you have a good sound system that can do all that, whether it's before they even step in, for day one, or just it's so streamlined, it gives time and attention back to really what matters.
Yeah.
Whether it's walking around the office, whether it's introducing them to the departments that they're inevitably going to need in order to be successful, like you talked about.
Yeah.
Whether it's just a download in time with their leader. Unfortunately, I see way too often, a day one of a new employee is spent with like the leader trying to pass them around because they're in the middle of trying to close out their sales month
or do whatever they're doing.
Or do whatever they're there to do, and missing and missing that opportunity to be there for that person's perhaps most important day or couple of days. And so anything you can do to streamline those functions so that you can open up that space to just wade into the culture and start to understand what's going to make you successful there. There's probably nothing more important.
Yeah. The going back to what we said in the beginning, it's you've got this person that's got all these competencies they're about to utilize in your company. And if we're not careful, they'll take all their competencies elsewhere when they don't feel they're a part of something. And the easiest way to feel like you're a part of something is when a company has at least the fundamentals down. They come in, they're able to do an effective orientation, which turns into an onboarding. But I promise you, you can have some of the most sophisticated infrastructure on the planet, and people will want to quit within about the third week if they don't know how to do their job there. If they don't know how to be successful in their job, you're spending a lot of money on a lot of things. What you want to make sure is part of your HR infrastructure is how do you get people up to speed to be successful in that role so that doesn't ultimately impact your hiring, recruiting, retention, rewards, recognition, liability, compliance, and all the other things, because you spent a lot of time and effort making it look right. And then where the rubber meets the road is the interaction with that human being on a daily basis to get them up to speed to do their job well. And, that's where we see companies turning over people and things like that. Stop for a second and say, wait a minute, I know I've got this right. I know I've hired them right. I've known I got the right people. why am I losing people in their first 3 to 6 months or first year? Because that's always a drain on a company's resources. And then also it impacts your culture as a whole, because now what are they going to say about your company? Oh, wow. Yeah, when I got hired, I didn't get this or I didn't get that. You don't want any of that. You want to make sure all those things fit together.
Well, and tell me if this is true with that as well. If you have people turning over in just a short number of years, that means the impact of those first 90 or maybe 6 months that they're in the company, when you're saying things aren't even going that well for them, and they're that's a bigger part of the culture than now, because the people that are there have only been they're constantly having people come in and learning that, and then they're instilling what's coming from the training that might not be done
100%.
correctly, so it just keeps repeating itself.
Yeah, that's what I call your people poster. So we have an
Yeah.
organizational poster that's supposed to be true about the company. These are all the things that we believe to be true and that we've implemented. And then you've got the thing they pull out of their drawer in their cubicle and they go like this. But here's what really happens. And then they hold it up, and I just titled it people poster. I do an exercise with CEOs, with executives, and say, let's make sure your values match what you want your employees to experience. And then let's make sure that your people poster, which would be like a climate survey or a culture survey, stop saying these things, because every time somebody says that, it impacts the ultimate way people work within this business. So what we want to do is address these obvious things. If you believe, back to training and development, if you believe training and development was good foundationally, but is not meeting the needs for people on the street, that's a people poster problem. People are saying that, listen, go there and then come back and don't worry about that. You won't use any of it. That's on a poster, and somebody is saying it over and over and over again. You need to address that mismatch, because that's creating mistrust. It's creating lack of effort. It's creating, well, do they even have their act together? Why are they spending all that time and money? And then you get these, mixed messages to a human being that starts to diminish their confidence. And now, are they going to use their competence? Maybe, maybe not. I need to go somewhere else that doesn't have this many issues, whatever it might be.
And those culture, I've been in some of those rooms too, where you get a culture survey back and you get some feedback, and it's a small percentage, but, and so maybe it gets thought like, hey, this is not a big deal. We don't have to go and hack at this or what have you. But at the end of the day, that person's walking around the office.
100%.
Like, that person, unless you could say, hey, I know this is anonymous, but do our people work in silos? Do they not talk to each other? And they're like, no, we do. Be like, okay, so this is a problem, because that person or couple people, or that group that is giving this kind of feedback, like, does not operate in a silo. So this is now spread across the organization, and it always shows up later when we do those culture surveys, and there was something you choose to ignore, and that it shows up in a more significant way 12 months later.
One last little piece on that. If the culture survey, or if the people poster keeps pointing out one group, one division, one department, or one leader, you need to have a conversation. And it might be, if it's a small business, it might be a family member. It might be someone that's been working there for a while, and they have a lot of intellectual competency to offer a company, but they're just not in the right role as a leader. That's okay. But you're going to have to be honest with yourself, because they're creating a massive gap of mistrust. And if it's a really good sign, if people don't want to leave your company, but want to constantly leave one area, that you just need to be honest with yourself and say, wait a minute, something's up. Have a good conversation with them. Maybe they're not in the right position. Maybe they need new training or development. But, that's something to pay attention to on those culture surveys. I've seen leaders like that get the culture survey and go, yeah, that's not a problem anymore. We let that person go, because they knew who it is. And the reality is, it's like the same person over and over again. Yep, no, they're gone too. No, we got rid of that problem. And you're like, no, you didn't get rid of the problem. You're the problem. You're the common denominator in everybody leaving your group, and it's showing up on your survey every 2 years, and you've got 2 years to fix it, and they're still showing up 4 years later. Okay, somebody needs to address this issue. And so that I actually sat on a consulting project where someone said that out loud. I just got through with the culture survey, and the leader looked at it and said, yeah, we don't have to worry about that anymore. I know who that was. They're gone. And I'm like, I think you missed the whole point of a culture survey. You might want to address the issue, not just that the person's gone and they won't say it anymore. So anyway,
because they said it to nobody else. Their beliefs were
ever
for anybody.
It's not impacting your company at all at any other opportunities. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of sharing, I mean, this show, and I shared it with you, Pete, is Rick's a journey of learning this industry. And, I'm delighted that he's had this opportunity to be with you because, I learned a ton from you in my time at Insperity and just, there are things I thought that I knew and, in the world of PEO and leadership. And then just, as you came in, not only did you accelerate that growth and development for me, but you did for many leaders at Insperity, and so
It was an honor. Yeah,
yeah,
it's an honor still to be friends and everything else. That was 12 good years well spent. I loved being a part of it. I loved being able to travel the country, working with people, sharing the story, everything, and that's really what it comes down to. If I was to make a final comment, is that every company. The employees tell a story. Every person, people tell a story about you. You create your story by how you interact with people. And then that story creates how people remember you and all of those things. And so, consider that as a company. The way your people talk about you, the way you interact with people on a daily basis, that creates your culture story. And that story permeates out into the marketplace. Same thing for us as individuals. We create a story about how we interact with people, how we serve people, and then ultimately that story permeates, and then hopefully people want to do business with you because the ultimate, gift of a good story is somebody refers you business or wherever it might be. And so I've spent 30 plus years trying to make a difference in people's lives, and I always, really appreciate opportunities to be able to talk about what I love, and it always will come back to how do you take care of people. And, and it's always been my pleasure to be able to do that. So it was fun to get to talk with y'all.
Yeah, of course. And like you said, you can't give what you don't have. And,
that's right.
I can definitely feel a lot of passion behind what you do, Pete. And, it's great to see. And I feel like I'm walking away with a certification from this conversation. We're talking about learning and development, and I'm over here taking notes while we're talking mid podcast because I want to remember a lot of the things we went over. And so thank you so much for coming on here and also just providing value to all of our Wagoneers and listeners out there. I really think they're going to get a lot out of this. And Pete, also maybe let them know where can folks, how can they reach out to you and find you if they want to work with you in the future.
Yeah, when I said that we do TLC, tender loving care for our customers and how we serve them, it's team leadership and culture development. And so when you look back on this slide right here, or this panel, this is where my company shines. You can go to questld.com, and this is a proprietary assessment. You get 4 tools with it, and the 4 tools help your company look at your team, your leadership, and your culture. And we look at problems and challenges, people and information, pace and change, and rules and procedures. So you get 4 tools to help your team and your leadership. And those 4 tools come together to look at how those people on that team and how those leaders are leading create that ultimate culture that helps your company move forward. And so you can go to questld.com, or you can just send me go on LinkedIn, find me there and connect with me. I'd love to connect with y'all on LinkedIn. I pretty much send out a quote of the day because I like doing something positive. Thursday, I try to do some type of positive thought leadership on Thursday. And then Fridays, if I have enough in me, I'll do something on the personality information because that's my love, is I'm sharing that. So, team of 10, $500 less than taking them out to dinner. And you can have a team assessment. You don't have to be a team of 10. You can be a team of 5. It's $50 a person for those 4 tools. And then if you want to grow from there with me, we'll look at a virtual training to create sort of this foundation. We can do the consulting part where we look at your success description, create that internal department for you, whatever you might need in order to bring your business forward. So.
Yeah. And he's a hell of a painter.
Love painting. I probably have a painting somewhere really close, but I won't overwhelm you with it.
You'll post them every once in a while on LinkedIn, and they're always
working
awesome.
Into your weekly schedule. Tuesdays are when you post your paintings. Thursdays, quotes.
That's right. I try to, like on LinkedIn, if you'll go back a couple, you'll get to see I did a whole series on how painting can relate to leadership. And so I try to do things that are a little different. Right now, if you'll pay attention on Fridays, I'm doing a sales team building exercise. So I've done 2 in a row. So anybody that's out there, you want a DISC sales team building exercise, go back and grab those 2, not last Friday, but the 2 Fridays before that. It's a whole team building exercise on how to use DISC and sales. So.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that with everybody. And I think, your impact in Insperity was enormous. But what I love about the fact that you're doing this on your own now is, that can be expanded to all sorts of organizations across the country that want to have access to what they're hearing here, right here, which is a dynamic leader, a dynamic instructor, and frankly, just a really wonderful person who cares about people. And so we really appreciate you being on. And like Rick said, kind of helping us put that word out to people who listen to this.
Yeah. Well, it's been my pleasure. So thank you all both.